Hello and welcome to Unveiling Reality. How are you doing this evening? I'm your host, Winning Reality, and this is Unveiling Reality, the show where you get the deep story behind all the things that are going on in our world. How's everybody doing this evening? I hope you all are well. Don't see any comments yet. I don't know who to say hello to. How's everybody doing? All right. Hey, CB, how you doing, man? CB, see me. Thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it. All right. Well, tonight we are going to have a great show. We're going to have one of our all-time favorites telling us about Marxism and how it got implemented into our country from the original origins. And the interesting thing about this is how long we've really known about this problem and how little we've actually been able to do about it. And that, again, comes back down to the complain and vote model, which we seem to be stuck in perpetually at this point. But mainly because we don't see it as big a problem as it is. When we take a deeper look, we see that it's been an ingrained problem in our society for a long time. And we should not be too surprised when we see things like, college kids coming out fully groomed into Marxism, Marxist ideals, Marxist ideology, and we shouldn't, because we just let it run wild, right? We haven't really done anything about it to kind of stop that. Let's take a look at the retrospective here real quick. Bring it on up. Now, here's I've gone through and highlighted a lot of the things that I feel like we've covered. We either done a show on, or we've had a lot of conversations and covered on it. Stop. And we and also some of the ones that I feel like we can we've may have covered, but we're kind of going to cover in a little bit deeper context as we go along. So we see here, we're over here in the first field tonight under Marxism and authoritarianism, and we're going to be looking into, let me get in closer to that. Yeah, there we go. And we're going to be looking into this origins, because it does play a big part in everything that kind of like goes on around in these areas. It's part of the divisiveness, the demoralization and destabilization practices of ideological subversion. And we're going to, am I missing an N there? Oh my goodness. All right, there we go. And okay, well, how about if I spell it right to start with? Subversion. All right. And we'll bold it, of course. Boom. All right, cool. And so we're going to, hey Daisy, how's it going? So we're going to dive into some information that comes right before actually the Yuri Bezmenov stuff. So G. Edward Griffin is a person that has been working on this for a very long time. I dare call him the godfather of the truth movement, in the sense that he has always stuck to what he's been talking about. He's never gone off on that grifter kind of edge. People could say, well, he wrote books about it, he did this and that. Well, you got to make a living trying to get the information out, right? But or Edwin Griffin, I guess people just call him Ed. He's still around. And, there's a chance maybe I can get him on at the end of this lecture he's going to give about Marxism and how it originated in our country. There's also some follow-up stuff where a guy that I think a lot of us know, Anomaly, did some interviews with him. So how cool to have G. Edward Griffin on your live stream to do an interview with, because for a lot of us, he is really like the godfather of what's going on. And if you don't know, G. Edward Griffin is the man who wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island, exposing the central banking system. And okay, go back. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. I hit something. And now it's weird. All this work gone. All right. There we go. Let's try it again. Subversion. All right. And bold. All right. We're back. Okay. So what I want to do is scroll out and then go to this. Okay. Yeah. All right. So exposing the central bank, right? Central banking system and how that came about in our country and what it's basically led to. So as you can see, scroll out, we can see all the things that we're kind of hitting as we go here. So that's the purpose of the board, to keep us on track and to let us know where we're at. And the way this works is that basically whatever is kind of coming up, I go with. And then some of these are going to be done in groups too. So I'm probably going to do like the disclosure project. A lot of UFO stuff coming up. So I'll probably be doing like the disclosure project, ancient aliens, like these four together probably, and we'll include a little bit of that as the tying in part. But that's just one example of how like some of the parts of the show are going to go. It really is a free flow of information as we kind of hit on these points as we go. And of course, as we break it out, we're looking into the bigger picture here, which is there we go. Which is the bigger picture here, which is the why aren't you moving today? I must be like clicked off or something. Yeah. All right, there it is. All right. And moving down into our veil, which is the fifth veil, the solution culture veil, and then on into the bigger ideas that are behind that. Now, the reason why we have the sixth veil unveiled is because we're looking at the bigger ideas that drive these other veils right here. So behind all of these, you'll see there is a theme of either enslavement or free will. Life equals rights, or people versus property, equal property. And we'll see that, how these all connect. So these are so we can make connections back to what's going on in these other veils. And Marxism is a big part of this sixth veil mindset and how those in the fourth veil operate, right? And like I said, there has to be a place for each one of these. We're going to be nestled right here, right out of view of these guys, right? Because they don't think that this is possible. They don't think that there is a social culture out there. They think that their model works great, and that to continue to perpetuate this system of abuse that enables their system of corruption, our system of control, which is a system of corruption. So, just to kind of like catch you guys up on that, one other thing I want to catch you up on as far as the channel goes is that I'm going to be making a second channel specifically for the copyright claimed AI kind of fun content that I do, and kind of get it off of this channel so that I can get remonetized. I've already started working on that. A lot of things have been either privated, taken down, or I'm in the process of moving some. So I released the Shizzy intro video because I wanted to get it over on Rumble today. And I may be doing some more of that. So if you see random videos pop up, that's what I'm doing. And then the goal is by Friday to submit the new request for monetization. And I think if I do it the way I'm doing it, I should get a fast turnaround. Now, I'm still going to submit the video I made along with it, but I'm going to also do all the, I guess, algorithmic corrections, all the corrections that would have set off their system, so that if it's just an automated process, which I kind of feel like it is, it'll be able to pop it back on really fast, like last time. I think last time when I went and I finally got monetized, I had to private a bunch of videos and then it just went through first time, like no questions asked. And since I have been monetized and shown some, meager inklings of success on the channel when monetized, they may be able to just give that back to me. So this will be like a purely live stream channel for the most part, and anything that goes up here that's copyright claimed will either get disputed or will get removed, or not removed, but like clipped out. So if I have a little bit of something in there, you may have a blank spot on the replay. But that's just the way it is. The full versions will always be over on Rumble to be viewed. So just know that that's the place to go. If anything is missing from a replay that you wanted to see, it'll be over there. But anyways, here we are, and let's get started with our evening here. Let me get rid of this. How's everybody doing? Hey, Suzanne, how you doing? Great to see you. Thank you for being here. Hey, Talking Trash Truth, how you doing? All right. Let's get going. And everybody on Rumble, I can't tell who you are, but thank you for being here and being there. Outro. All right. So the title of this is called "More Deadly Than War," a speech by G. Edward Griffin. It was done in 1969. So way back then, we were there were people out there trying to stop this Marxist invasion here and trying to bring people to the bring people to light about what's going on. Now, it's funny because you think that you always hear about the big red scare and how people were all, it's supposed to be a big joke, right? Like that wasn't a real thing. The truth of the matter is, I think it was downplayed on purpose. Like I think that obviously it was a big problem. Obviously there was something going on there, and we can see how it has spread exactly how Yuri warned us it would. Um, eh, Not to a degree of being taken over by another country, but to basically collapsing a country from within, right? Changing its ideology, having it hand itself over to this new state of mind. And I think that a lot of people make the mistake of believing that everything's going to like snap back into place and look like it used to look in terms of like a Soviet Union or a Nazi Germany or anything like that. It always evolves. It always puts on a new face. It's not going to go back and put on the old face again. It's going to put on a new face that's going to keep you fooled for a while or just long enough to get wrapped up in it and for them to have control over the situation. That's the idea. But in this case, I think that it's evolving even more so in the fact that you're realizing that you don't need all this stuff to control a big group of people once they're divided and destabilized. And at crisis, just when you want to make a move, you can do it. The options there, sure. I mean, they can cut off the money in a second. They can cut off the supply chain in a second. The power or whatever. They can cause problems for us. The internet, you know, that's obvious, right? So we have to trust that that doesn't happen. But in a lot of cases, it wouldn't be in their best interest to do it. So you have to understand that as well. And also that a lot of the lore that comes out, a lot of the scary stuff that you hear, obviously doesn't have to be true to be effective, does it? It's certainly, hey, Lady Autumn, how you doing? It certainly has enough people freaked out and divided up and trapped in dead end rabbit holes that it's purely effective as it is. Like the scare tactic itself will keep paralyze people, enough people to have them just complain and vote, right? Not actually get out there and become part of solution culture. And you can see by a topic like this, right? This to be a topic that everybody's highly interested and involved in, especially those who want to believe that they're on top of things, and they're a good source of information for people. However, you can see that those people rarely show up. So it goes to show that a lot of people just want to be right rather than know the truth, understand the truth, constantly making adjustments about their own belief systems to make sure that they're on in line with the truth. And that's the way it is. And that's probably the way it's always been, right? You're gonna get a lot of people who just don't care or don't know to care or think they already got it down, despite the amount of time and effort and years they've put into actually understand these issues. But as people like us, we're here, and we can spread the word. We can be the ones that have the ultimate information on these stories, and it will always be the smartest ones in the crowd, being able to add the information in that's missing and help point people in the right directions, which will eventually lead them to our solution culture. But um, like I said, look at the people who really run their mouth about things, and where do they go to the real serious conversations? They generally don't. And so keep that in mind. And as we go, and here you go, you're going to be on top of things. You're going to know and understand the origins of uh, Marxism and how much was being done back in the day to try to prevent what we're going through right now. G. Edward Griffin is certainly one of the godfathers of solution culture for sure. So let's take a look. Hey, Tweety, how you doing? The old CGI back in the day. Everybody always dressed so nice back then. You think that'll ever come back where everybody's just all dressed up? Like we'll get tired of slack look, and everybody's like, man, I'm gonna look sharp now. I don't know. Usually, I always thought it was a lot of work to dress up, put a suit on, and tie, and all that stuff. But yeah, you look nice though.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, let me say welcome to our home, and
Look how
thank you for
polite they are,
taking the
too.
time to be here. I'm well aware that whether you're here in person or through the medium of motion picture, that for most of you, it's not easy to fit meetings of this kind into your schedules. But the fact that you are here indicates that you do have an interest in the subject, and that means.
Oh, and by the way, at the end of this, again, we're going to watch the follow-up interviews about this particular lecture from modern day. So Anomaly did a great interview. I got a couple of short clips from him, and we're going to find out about him and about him with Yuri. He's going to talk about Yuri. So please hang around and see those parts, especially if you've been with me through the whole journey and did all the watching of the Yuri business stuff in the very beginning, almost a year ago now.
There's a tremendous obligation on my part to develop that subject with the kind of usable information that will make it worth your while. So in order not to waste any of your time, let's dispense with the usual preliminaries and get right down to the business at hand. The title of this presentation is More Deadly Than War, but the subject matter itself is revolution. We're going to examine in quite a bit of detail.
Oh, and Talking Trash the Truth, thank you for the $10 in Rumble. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Here we go.
The communist theory and practice of revolution, particularly as applied to the United States. Now, this will not be something dreamed up out of thin air. This will be the strategy as taught by them and advocated by them in their own manuals, in their textbooks, and in their schools. Now, the organization of this material will lead to three rather startling conclusions. The first is that the communist program for revolution in America is divided into two phases, violent and nonviolent. The second conclusion.
Oh, I wanted to add too that this is going to be in the Repairing History show we're doing. This is going to this information is going to be key for that show as well, because the Marxists not only had a plan to invade, they had several plans, but they also went after the Black community way back when too. So we're going to be learning about that on Repairing History, by the way, and we got a great a collection of information on that.
Conclusion is that the strategy for
It's pretty cool,
revolution
back in the day it looked old.
Chaos,
now it looks cool.
Anarchy, mass confusion.
My mom used to give me a hard time. I'd say, what are you talking about? Or, like I didn't know what was going on or something like that. Probably right. But I'd say, what are you talking about? You guys hadn't even invented color when you were little.
And panic among the people, a crisis in government, and then out of the vacuum, the sudden seizure of power by communist-led guerrilla bands. The third conclusion is that the nonviolent phase of revolution actually is more important to the communists and more potentially dangerous to us. Now, the strategy for this phase calls for the gradual transition of our government into a communist regime, done peacefully and legally, but under the banner of socialism. This, then, is the outline of the material that lies ahead. So let's start right at the beginning with conclusion number one.
So, like, when you hear, the Bernie supporters and stuff talk about, oh, it's just, it's Democrat, it's different kind of socialism, blah, blah, blah. They always kind of use the mud and the water, right? Think about this. Like, even back in '69, they knew that they were going to be using that banner of socialism to kind of lead people into this authoritarianism by opening up, making it look attractive and making it look benign compared to communism. Yeah.
Which is that the communist program for revolution in America is divided into two phases, violent and nonviolent. Now, a good place to begin is with this communist booklet entitled On the Nature of Revolution, the Marxist Theory of Social Change. It was written by Herbert Aptheker, one of the leading theoreticians of the Communist Party in this.
And these are the pamphlets and things that they used to go and hand out. Like, so if you recall some of the other stuff that we've covered, right? Like the cults and mind control and so on. There's been references to being out on the streets, handing pamphlets out to people, bringing people into the group, and so on. So yeah, here's one of them right here. He's going to read out of. But these were commonplace. Like you could go out and you could get someone would hand you one of these back in the day.
Country. And on page 11, Aptheker says, the equating of violence with the nature and process of revolution is not correct. Violence may or may not appear in such a process, and its presence or absence is not a determining feature of the definition. Now, this comes as quite a surprise to many of us because for years, we've been used to thinking of communist revolutions only as those which involve the overthrow of governments by force and violence. Now, that entire phrase has been written and spoken so often as a single concept that many of us haven't even considered the possibility that the communists might have another approach to their goal, that they might overthrow the government without force and violence, that they might, in fact, plan to come to power through means that properly could be called peace and politics. Now, in order to go any further, it'll be necessary for us to define a few terms. When the communists speak of the two kinds of revolution, they don't come right out and say so in plain English. Of course not. You see, they claim to be practicing something called scientific Marxism, and so they have to dress up these crude concepts in elaborate phraseology. For instance, when the communists speak of violent revolution, they describe it as a war of national liberation. Now, the so-called theory behind this is that the people of the country marked for takeover supposedly are an oppressed people. They're dominated by an imperialistic foreign power that has colonized them and exploited them. And so the communists claim that it's their duty, their historic duty, to liberate them from the yoke of fascism or imperialism or colonialism or whatever. Now, naturally, the communist orientation of the movement is played down. They prefer to identify themselves usually as a People's Army of Liberation or a National Liberation Front. Of course, this is the kind of guerrilla warfare we've seen used in China, Algeria, Cuba, South Vietnam, and many other places around the world. But there are other phrases also used to describe the same process. Occasionally, they'll refer to this violent type of revolution as an anti-imperialist war or an anti-colonialist war, but they all equal the same thing. Wars of national liberation, anti-imperialist wars, and anti-colonialist wars are all phrases used to describe that aspect of communist revolution aimed at overthrowing the government by means of force and violence. To describe their nonviolent revolution, the communists most often use the term proletarian revolution, but they also refer to it as the socialist revolution and sometimes as the anti-monopoly struggle. But here again, they all add up to the same thing. The proletarian revolution, the socialist revolution, and the anti-monopoly struggle are all merely different ways in which the communists describe their strategy for overthrowing the government through non-violent means. Well, all right, having defined some of the key phrases, we can return now to the communist literature and be able to understand what they mean when they use these words. Now, in 1960, the representatives from communist parties all over the world gathered in Moscow and issued a joint declaration which included this statement: "Our time, whose main content is the transition of capitalism to socialism, is a time of socialist revolutions and national liberation revolutions." In other words, simply stated, we're living in an era of two kinds of revolution, one violent and the other nonviolent. Now, here's a document published by the Communist Party in this country in 1968. It's entitled "The New Program of the Communist Party USA, a Second Draft." And on this subject, here's what it says. Contemporary revolutions bear two distinctive marks. They are socialist, they are anti-imperialist.
And you're going to see everything he's talking about. You're going to see that it came true. Like, that's the thing about G. Edward Griffin, and when he talks about, he's spot on. And though it's not precise, right? It never is going to be precise, but the actions, the results have gone on and they continue to go on. So understanding that this isn't a problem that went away is very important, and that it's an ongoing issue. It's very important. You can't ignore the fact that this is going on in the background and think that everything will be hunky-dory with your perfect vote.
More than 1 billion human beings are now embarked on socialist revolution. A larger number is in varying stages of revolution for national liberation. Well, in order to relate this general concept of two kinds of revolution to the specific application here in the United States, it'll be necessary for us to examine rather closely the communist position on what they describe as the Negro question. Now, basically summarized, the communist position on the Negro question is as follows. As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one
Here's what I was
spot,
telling you about.
they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. They said in no unmistakable terms that the Negro people, because of their secondary social status and their predominant working class composition, offered greater revolutionary possibilities than any other cross-section of the population. To develop these possibilities, the communists proclaimed that the American Negro constituted a separate nation within a nation, a colony within the continental borders of the United States. The people of this nation were said to be oppressed and exploited by colonialist, imperialist, racist America. Consequently, the Communist Party called for their liberation, their right to self-determination, to break away from the United States and to set up their own nation within our borders. Now, to bring this about, of course, force and violence must be used. A war of national liberation must be fought. The territory designated for this nation to be liberated was the Black Belt in the South, those counties and states in which the Negro population was dominant. When established, the new nation was to have a Soviet-type government and be totally subservient to the Communist Party. But, and this is extremely important, the communists made it clear from the very beginning that they could never hope to capture all of the United States with a war of national liberation, only part of it. You see, elsewhere in the world, the segment of the population supposedly liberated by the communists has been a majority segment. The peasants in China, the Muslims in Algeria, all the people in Cuba. But in the United States, our Negro population is in the minority. And even if the communists should be successful in creating similar liberation movements among other segments of our people, as they're trying to do, for instance, among Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, and even American Indians, even if they should succeed and then amalgamate all of these together into one large liberation movement, it still adds up to a minority of the total population. And the communists are not stupid. They realize that revolution of force and violence dependent upon a minority is doomed to ultimate failure, except in those areas where they actually do constitute a majority. But they aren't going to settle for just part of the United States. They want all of it. And so they made it clear long ago that their violent war of national liberation must be secondary to the nonviolent proletarian revolution. To take the United States, all of the United States, it'll be necessary, they say, to involve white people as well as black, to create a broad coalition, a revolutionary link between the civil rights movement, organized labor, peace groups, student dissidents, and in general, to escalate the revolution in America from race war to class war. Now this, in a nutshell, is the communist position on the Negro question. Let's turn now to the record and see how the communists themselves explain it. Now, this communist booklet entitled American Negro Problems was published in 1928. It was written by John Pepper, alias Joseph Pogany. Now, Pogany was sent to this country as the personal envoy of Joseph Stalin, and his specific mission was to bring the American Communist Party into line with the policies and directives from Moscow, particularly with regard to the Negro question. And here is what Pogany said. The Communist Party of America, in its fight against imperialism, must recognize clearly the tremendous revolutionary possibilities of the liberation movement of the Negro people. It is the basic duty of the Communist Party to develop all revolutionary possibilities of the Negro race. The Black Belt in the South constitutes virtually a colony within the body of the United States of America. Self-determination means the right to establish their own state, to erect their own government if they choose to do so. The Communist Party of America must come out openly and unreservedly for the right of national self-determination for the Negroes. But it would be a major mistake to believe that there can be any other revolution in imperialist America than a proletarian revolution. Now let me repeat that last sentence because it's the key to this entire presentation. It would be a major mistake to believe that there can be any other revolution in imperialist America than a proletarian revolution. Well, moving forward to the year 1935.
You see how that things are starting to connect here, right? Yeah, we have a long history of struggle in this country for many different reasons. But when you look at the divisiveness, right? When you look at the someone had set out with this plan back at the time he's talking about, even before the time he's talking about, really, because it had already gotten into full swing by the time he kind of got wind of it. It's not like this is a warning, it's coming. It was already full blown. But had set up that plan, had set around a think tank and said, you know what, how can we bring down this superpower of this bastion of freedom and make it an authoritarian state that we can exploit? Well, let's analyze it. Let's look at it. What do you got here? Well, you got this whole thing between blacks and whites going on. That's unique, right? Fairly unique for the world. And so they put their heads together and they said, you know, this is it. And then so they start coming up with a bunch of, you know, subversion for the black community, and also to support that subversion by gaining power in government. So you'll start to see the dots connect here a lot with this. That's why I'm saying, like, Yuri Bezmenov is the real red pill. And honestly, this information right here will give you a lot of the dot connecting you're going to need to see, oh, that's how things got like this. Oh, that's where it came from. You know, this is the real smart stuff where you start to understand the foundation of these issues so that you can actually address the issues correctly instead of just like, you know, how we've kind of gone about it. Oh, was there really a Red Scare or not? Is this not real? Oh, it's McCarthyism. You know, we buy into the lore itself instead of actually looking at what people were doing and what they were saying at the time and who was saying it and how credible they were and where they were coming from. That's what we do here, right? So we're getting to the bottom of things. We always get to the root, right? So here we go.
We come to this communist booklet entitled The Negroes in a Soviet America, written by James Ford and James Allen.
It looks like the dude from like Rhodey from a little bit like Rhodey from Iron Man.
Beginning on page 24, the general strategy is laid out in rather graphic form. You see, there's a major heading here entitled The Negro and Revolution. Directly beneath this, there's a subheading entitled Two Revolutions in One. And then within this section, it says, the problem of Negro liberation has two aspects. We shall first consider each separately and then show how the solution for the first flows into the solution for the second. Now, the next subheading then is entitled The Rebellion of an Oppressed Nation. And the section that follows that describes the violent revolution that must be fought to liberate the Black Belt of the South. And then finally, over in the next page, there's another subheading entitled The Proletarian Revolution. And here we begin to get an idea finally of what this phase of the revolution is all about. It says, capitalism is decaying. It is an outworn system. Capitalism is based upon the private ownership of machines, factories, railroads, land, and all other means of production. Only one thing can do away with the basis for the existence of capitalism, the expropriation of the capitalists. And by the way, I'm sure you realize that everyone here, by communist definition at least, is a capitalist. So you should feel good to know that there are those who are planning your expropriation someday. In order to expropriate the capitalists, the workers first need to discard the existing government machinery and to institute a working class government. Under this new workers' government, the building of socialism begins. Now, exactly what that's all about, the building of socialism, we'll get to in a moment. But finally, on page 28, under the third subheading entitled The Combination of Two Revolutions, The communists reveal how the two phases of their revolution are related to each other and which of the two is most important to them.
Okay, so one thing you'll hear him say later on is about the setting here, right? So they're having this small meeting of folks. This is almost like a neighborhood meeting where this, the solid dude who's got all the information in the neighborhood gets everybody together for some drinks and cigars or whatever they did back then. And they have a short little meeting where they sit around and they listen. That's pretty nice. I mean, that's not like any parties I've ever been to. But I mean, I guess nowadays it'd be kind of weird, huh? We just do it on Zoom or something or have a live stream about it. But yeah, I mean, they would gather, and he said that they did this film here. I think they only sold like maybe 200 at a time just to kind of, VHS tape. I don't even know what they did. He'll tell us about it in the interview. But it wasn't very, let's just put it this way. What he said, we're all seeing this now. We see millions of views on this video. It had exploded a few years ago. This was very rarely seen back in the day. And that's a lot of the reason why, a lot of people didn't have the information. They went along with what they saw on television, right? Because they just read the news, they complained, and they voted. That's all they did. So they were like, oh, don't worry about it. He's a good man, or, it doesn't matter who I vote for, or this guy, as long as I vote for the right party, it's that, right? Again, not a solution set mindset like Ed has here, but a mindset of in slavery, basically apathy or indifference, right? And it may look like all rebellious when people do it and say they don't care about things or they don't have to, or who can, screw them or let it all collapse. But that's such false bravado. It's false bravado because like that bullets are flying and you're starving your ass off and your kid's crying. You ain't gonna be acting like you're a big tough guy then, So I'm saying like a lot of people have this false bravado at times of what they consider peace, but that's the perfect opportunity for the real covert underminers to strike, right, and cause damage and pain and suffering.
Between the proletarian revolution and the revolution of the Negro people, there is a living link. This is the working class. Here reposes the leadership of the two aspects of the revolution. But the Negro communist is first and foremost the exponent of the proletarian revolution.
All right, so you remember too. I'm gonna throw another one at you here. You guys remember the whole Obama thing, right? About who's Obama's real dad and all that stuff. Heading back to Frank Marshall Davis, right? He was one of these guys who got wrapped up in this with these communists, and he's the guy who supposedly either is Obama's father or his prime paternal role model, right? So we wonder why Obama grew into this organizer, into this communist with a mask on. And he's so good at it. He came up around the people that had the plan and that were really the motivating driving factor behind implementing it.
Well, 1935 is a long time ago. And sometimes we hear it said that the communists have since abandoned this concept. But ladies and gentlemen, they cannot abandon it for the simple reason that if they did so, they'd be abandoning the classic dual form of revolution dictated by Marxism-Leninism. They'd cease to be communists. To justify violence, they have to be able to claim that they're liberating people. And if people are to be liberated, then it's necessary to go through the motions, at least, of pretending that they have a right to form a nation of their own. And so the communist position on the Negro question today is no different than it was back in 1928. Now, Political Affairs is the official monthly magazine of the Communist Party in this country. The date on this particular issue is November 1968. The feature article for that month was The Right of Black America to Create a Nation, written by communist theoretician Claude Lightfoot. Now, Lightfoot points out that many years of migration of Negroes into the North and of Caucasians into the South have altered the population statistics to the point where the black belt is considerably smaller today than it was when the communist position on the Negro question was first drafted. Therefore, he says, the concept of a Negro nation must not necessarily be restricted to just one large territory in the South, but must be expanded now to include the so-called ghetto areas in the North. So having updated the basic strategy to reflect present realities, he then repeats the same old communist line. On page 9, he says, "We should call for a plebiscite of all black Americans on whether they want to remain in the general Commonwealth or to establish another nation within the continental United States. Thus, the slogan of self-determination today means the struggle for the right of black America to form a nation if it elects to do so." Now, in passing, ladies and gentlemen, you may have wondered why the Communist Party has been a staunch supporter of the drive to place a black studies curriculum into our high schools and colleges. Well, the reason becomes obvious the minute you take a look at the textbooks and the study guides. The net effect of these courses on the students who enroll is to create a consciousness of nation. By stressing the historical and cultural differences between our black and white citizens instead of the similarities, the predictable impact upon the student is such that he'll view the communist call for a separate nation with far more acceptance than his parents did. Under the guise of academic balance, these courses have become a brilliant device for conditioning young people to accept still one more part of the total program for revolution. But returning once again to Claude Lightfoot, after having called for a separate nation, he then repeats the ever important point that as important as the national liberation movement may be, it still must be secondary in importance to the nonviolent, peaceful transition to communism called the socialist revolution. He says, "From this it follows that the advocates of a black nation must identify themselves with all that is required to set up a socialist America, recognizing that black people alone could never destroy capitalism." To digress again for just a moment, I'd like to point out that this concept of two kinds of revolution is really the basis for that much publicized split between Moscow and Peking. The Moscow group says, "There are two kinds of revolution, violent and nonviolent. We believe in using either or both, depending on which combination proves to be the most effective. But as true Marxist-Leninists, we believe that the gradual, nonviolent approach is more effective in today's modern world." To which the Peking...
There you have it. You see why people sit around and wait for bullets to fly to react and do something? They don't understand, because they don't take the time away from entertainment or anything else to understand, or they depend on politicians to solve their problems. That when the bullets fly, it's too late. It's already too late then. Like, you're done. Prepare to suffer. It's over. Your time to act, your time to be responsible and be accountable has passed at that point. Now all you can do is pick up a gun or some kind of weapon and try to survive if you can. But most of those people are going to get right on the train. They'll get right on the bus. They'll get right on the train, and they'll be seated with their seatbelts on as they drive into the end of their life. And that's the way that would turn out, right? If that was the case. A complete takeover, or what people are imagining is going to happen. The worst conspiracy theorists out there are the ones who are saying they're going to do this, they're going to do that. This is what this means. This is what that means. Those guys, right? A lot of those guys are just going to get on the bus. They're going to get right on the train. Oh, it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. They're not going to have anywhere to go. And they'll run out of luck really fast. So yeah, at that point, it's survival. Your country's not gonna be there. You're not gonna be in a position to implement solutions unless, at that point, some kind of real legitimate army had been made up. But this is the thing. If you don't understand that subversion and mind control and all these other factors are affecting our ability to actually resist any kind of takeover, to reverse any kind of subversive subversion in our country. If you don't realize that, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it at the point where they decide to roll on in and change the way everything looks and works, right? If they even do that, like I'm in the camp now that they don't even have to do that. It's just a threat of it, right? They can just continue to marionette us from the political spectrum. They can continue to create false narratives to the media and through technology, and they can learn to isolate and discredit others through the same means. So would it ever go as far as tanks on the road and countries invading? I really don't think so. I think it's just going to be more of a gradual control mechanism. It's so much easier to keep everything together and in place when you do that. And there's no need for it. And everybody's already scared through the lore that, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. So they're standing still waiting for a bullet to fly. They're going to be really easy to find, really easy to collect, really easy to motivate to do whatever they wanted to do. Watch. In fact, if anything, the pandemic proved it, didn't it?
King group shouts in reply, "Heresy, heresy." True, there are two kinds of revolution, and we to practice either or both, but
this, if you might be being funny, but propaganda just means information. And though this was, like I said, and he's going to talk about this modern day, this talk he's given here, modern day, at the end of the near the end of the show after this video is done. But no, this is like literally a legitimate meeting that was at his home and filmed and then released on like videotape or film or something like that, and was shipped out to people that requested it. I think he said he sold around 200 copies or something, maybe. I don't know, maybe 200 copies went out the door. But by no means was this is this some kind of gimmick. This is like legitimately people who are concerned about what's going on. He's got legitimate communist pamphlets in his hand that are being handed out to kids in college campuses. Now, this is the real deal right here. This isn't the Hollywood version.
We are the true Marxist-Leninists, for we believe that the quick, violent approach is more effective in today's modern world. And there's the total difference between the two factions of world communism. Each claims to be more correct in its interpretation of classical communist strategy. But as far as the United States is concerned, you can be sure that it makes precious little difference. Both types of revolution are being used against us today. Both are enhanced by the presence of the other, and both lead to exactly the same destination.
I see we got some people joining us. Thanks for being here. Please like that video for me. I really appreciate it. I'm also on Rumble as well. We are watching G. Edward Griffith's 1969 lecture called More Deadly Than War. It's about how the Marxist takeover occurred and our country will take over, like how the Marxist invasion occurred or was occurring, is occurring. And this is like just an amazing piece by a very smart gentleman, very educated gentleman who is letting us know about his research, and basically at the time, 1969, giving out a warning that we need to pay closer attention to this. We need to do something about these groups before it gets to the next stage. It gets worse. Of course, very little people heard this at the time. There was also that whole thing of McCarthyism and so on, that people just brushed it off as some kind of like hyperbolic scare campaign against communists. Of course, there were communists that were the ones saying that, so it's kind of ironic. Yeah, so that's what that is. So thanks for being here.
All right, let's move along now to the second conclusion. The strategy for violent,
because as I said that, the three people left. Okay.
Revolution in America calls for chaos, anarchy, destruction, a crisis in government, mass confusion and panic among the people, and then out of the vacuum, the sudden seizure of power by communist-led guerrilla bands. Now, this is the kind of activity, the overthrow of government by force and violence, that most people think of when they speak about communist revolutions, so there's no need to belabor the point. But I'm going to take just a moment to show the extent to which the communists actually are planning to use this kind of revolution against the United States. Now, this is not so well known. Now, here is a book that I think ought to be in every home library. It's entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson.
Okay, that book right there, you should definitely get it. If you like to read, highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal book, and you will get a lot out of it. And you'll be amazed by the information that's in it too. You'll be like, wow, I can't believe we had this much foresight into what's going on, and people just stuck their, sat around their thumbs in their asses.
Now, as you can see from his photograph, Manning Johnson was a Negro, and he was also a member of the Communist Party. He joined the party as a young man because he honestly believed that the communists were trying to improve the conditions of his people. He was a dedicated communist, and eventually he rose to one of the highest ranks. He was appointed to the National Negro Commission of the Communist Party, USA. But after many years, Manning Johnson finally came to the realization that the communists weren't the least bit interested in improving the conditions of the Negro people. He discovered that instead they were merely planning to use his people, and these are his words, to use them as cannon fodder in a bloody revolution to destroy America. And when he woke up to this, he dropped out of the party and devoted the rest of his life trying to alert his fellow citizens of all races to the true nature of the Communist Party as he knew it to be from the inside. And this book contains much of that story. I wish I had the time to examine the entire volume with you page by page, but here at least is one short quotation that pertains to the immediate topic. Manning Johnson said, "Black rebellion was what Moscow wanted. Bloody racial conflict would split America. During the confusion, demoralization and panic would set in. Then finally the Reds say," now at this point he quotes verbatim from a communist directive that he studied while inside the party. "Workers stop work. Many of them seize arms by attacking arsenals. Street fights become frequent. Under the leadership of the Communist Party, the workers organize revolutionary committees to be in command of the uprising. Armed workers seize the principal government offices, invade the residences of the president and his cabinet members, arrest them, declare the old regime abolished, establish their own power." Now, here is a piece of vicious communist propaganda that perhaps some of you have seen. It's called The Crusader. It's published periodically in Red China and is widely circulated through the Negro communities here in America. It's written by Robert F. Williams, one of the organizers of the Revolutionary Action Movement.
You stop and think about this for a minute, that a lot of the problems we're facing today came from outside our own country. Like, just we're implanted from other countries, other ideologies, from foreigners. We're implanted by foreigners. You know, it kind of like could, you know, shape your mind about sorry, I just got something handed to me here and lost my train of thought. It can kind of shape your mind about the way that the way that we approach, like, how our feelings towards other countries, right? They're allowing this to happen, right? You know, Communist Party of China is sending this literature to the black leaders, black community leaders in our country, right? And then we're dealing with all this shit now, right? We're dealing with CRT, we're dealing with all these other things. And we look at each other and we, you know, that's the whole point of this show, is to show that, hey, you know, we're looking at each other and we're getting divided by it. When it's really coming, we need to know who to point the finger at, who actually originated these problems, right? Where do they come from? And when we actually learn who the actual person is who antagonized the fight between us, right? Then we could join together and turn around and say, now you got to deal with both of us, right? That's the idea about healing racism and division in our country, is that it's not just black and white, man. There's a lot of agitation going on that has made it black and white. Because when smart people stop and they think about it, they know that the whites help the black side, and the blacks have helped the white side, that we're not against each other by any kind of ordained birth mission, right? It's that other people have always been picking at the wounds, right? And always been agitating the easily agitatable situations in order to drive the division, right? They're usually the ones wearing the big smile and saying, we're here to help, and things are so unfair for you, and look at my blue hair, right? Usually people like that. I mean, I'm being, you know, of course, I'm being a little bit modern with the hair color, but I mean, seriously, it's always those people. And they're just being puppeted by other people that were They probably don't even know where half of the shit comes from that they believe. So when you run across one of them and you can actually tell them where their beliefs come from, you kind of plant that seed that may actually free their mind at one point. That's why it's important to know this stuff.
They're known as RAM. Williams also was the president of the local chapter of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina. At that time, needless to say, he wasn't telling very many people that he was also a member of the Communist Party. Now, one day back in 1961, he decided to start a small war of national liberation of his own. Apparently, he was too impatient to wait for the big signal. So finally, to avoid prosecution for assault with a deadly weapon and for kidnapping, he fled to Cuba and then to Red China, where he now writes communist propaganda. One other thing you should know about Robert Williams is that recently he was elected by members of SNCC, CORE, RAM, the NAACP, and similar groups as the president in exile of something called the Republic of New Africa. Following the communist line in every detail, these men claim that they're the representatives of a new government and a new nation within the continental borders of the United States. They issued a demand to the State Department that a large segment of land be turned over to them as their rightful territory. The proclamation said that they're now prepared to negotiate in good faith the peaceful transfer to them of the southern portion of the United States. The implication being, of course, that if they don't get it peacefully, then they'll just have to take it by force and violence. Already, the Republic of New Africa has established a central headquarters in Mississippi, and its leaders in the north are actively recruiting a Black Panther guerrilla force and what they call a Revolutionary Freedom Corps, the RFC, from among black militant students to act as organizers and to set up local provisional governments, as they call them, in the so-called ghetto areas.
Guy, can you imagine Panther gorillas coming at you? Jeez. Combination of swiftness and intelligence and deadly claws.
But the reason I've mentioned all this is merely to introduce properly one Robert F. Williams, the president in exile of this Republic of New Africa and the author of The Crusader. Now here is what Robert Williams says. The lifeblood of U.S. capitalism is its productive capacity and its extensive commerce. If these two factors were to become paralyzed and rendered sterile, the orderly function of the government establishment would degenerate into a state of chaos, and the superstructure of the system would collapse. The more automated a society is, the more vulnerable it is to forces of calamity. What would highly mechanized America be without electrical power? What would it be without modern transportation? What would it be without its industrial capacity? And then, having asked these questions, Robert Williams proceeds to explain in minute detail exactly how to manufacture the devices that can be used by a mere handful of people to ensure that highly automated America will lose its electrical power,
ATR.
its modern transportation, and its industrial capacity.
Thanks for being here.
I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that less than a dozen people, if they know what they're doing, can reduce any of our major cities into a helpless, seething mass of confusion, panic, and death. Just one person can poison the city's entire water supply, or destroy the main aqueduct, or blow up the principal pumping stations. And where would people in Los Angeles, for instance, get a drink of water if it didn't come out of a pipe? And how long can a human being survive without water? 4 or 5 days, perhaps? But long before that, there'd be tens of thousands of people dead in our cities, not from thirst, but because they were unable to defend what water they had from roving bands of desperate people who were dying of thirst. And that's thinking only of the loss of water. In your mind's eye, compound that with no food, no electricity, no way to dispose of sewage, no police protection, no water pressure to fight fires, no radio or TV, no telephone, no buses, no gasoline for your car, no way to escape, no place to go if you could. And don't think for a minute that the countryside would be immune from disaster either. In this issue of The Crusader, the communists call not only for extensive chaos within the cities, but for putting to the torch every village, every forest, every field, and every barn. The plan is...
Okay, so you hear this now, right? And you're looking at modern day, and you're thinking, there's some fires up north. There's some fires that go off every year about this in the same places. They're finding out these are arson, people committing arson. Violence in the streets. Yeah, we had the Summer of Love. All these things start to come together. You start to see the dots connect. You're like, wow, the origins of these things were not quite as organic and as movement of the people as we are led to believe by the narrative, right? There's a lot of these things have been put in place and have been in place for a long time. They evolve and they change, they change faces, they change maybe agendas somewhat, but it's still all based on the same root.
For raging fires from one city to the next. The reason? Well, First, there's the value of sheer destruction. Secondly, it would force us to deploy our defenses and rescue units over the widest possible area. The communists point out that as long as our police and National Guard remain concentrated, they're invincible. But if they can be forced to spread out over the entire city and into the countryside as well, then they can be picked off from ambush one by one. And the third value of massive fire to the communists.
Clumsy, this is G. Edward Griffin. He's the guy who wrote Creature from Jekyll Island, and he's well known. He's also the guy who platformed Yuri Bezmenov, the guy who taught us about ideological subversion in some of our very first streams here. But his work's been around a long time. They're gonna have an interview with. I'm gonna have an interview with Anomaly and him after this is over. Very short segments about this film he made right here. He's gonna give us some backstage details. And then the other about meeting and working with Yuri Bezmenov, which is one of our heroes of the channel here. So very astute gentleman, very educated, intelligent, researched, has been doing work for a long time. You don't have to agree with everything he says, but he had a good foothold on what was going on at the time here, and he was ringing the alarm bell. And I guess maybe if more people had heard his warnings back then, the world would be a slightly different place right now. But anyways, we can still learn from what he has to say, and we can see that what we're seeing today has some roots in the past for sure.
Communists is psychological. The average American, they say, soft and decadent, when he sees billows of black smoke rising from one horizon to the other, when at night the only light he has to see by is the flickering red from flames leaping into the sky, he'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere with the guerrilla bands as they strike at the community's power centers. The Crusader explains how to set up sniper units in crowded metropolitan areas, how to manufacture jumbo Molotov cocktails, the gallon jug size, and how to mix the gasoline with certain ingredients to make it burn like napalm, how to pour gasoline into utility manholes in the streets to set fire to the main telephone cables, how to put sulfur tips from matches into air conditioning units and blow up large buildings, how to ignite gas mains and oil storage tanks. It explains how radio-controlled model airplanes can be used to fly explosive heavily guarded fences into gasoline storage areas or munition stockpiles. It even calls for infiltration into the National Guard units, revolutionaries posing as non-militants for the purpose of getting free military training and for gaining access to critical military supplies and heavy weapons. And then, finally, Robert Williams says this: any all-out minority revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes to protect their property and families. The middle class is very large, but it is not accustomed to deprivation and terror. Because of its affluence, it has waxed soft. It has no stomach for massive fire, blood, and violence. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. A few years of violent, sporadic, and highly destructive uprisings will set the stage for the grand finale. After the stage is properly set through protracted struggle, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days of highly organized, fierce fighting, sabotage, and massive firestorm. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no evaluation would be complete if we failed to note that the communist blueprint calls also for white retaliation and violence in the black communities. It's a very important objective for the Communist Party. So far, they've only been able to involve a small percentage of our Negro people in this war of national liberation. The great majority want no part of it in any form. But the one sure way to change that is to have white vigilante groups striking into the Negro sections, supposedly to seek revenge. We mustn't kid ourselves into thinking that the communists have placed their agitators only into the black communities. They're working both sides of the street. They want hatred, violence, and bloodshed between the races, and they don't care how they get it or whom they use, even children if necessary. Part of the plan calls for commando squad.
Hear that? Even children if necessary. Again, think about the things that go on, the roots, the subversion. This should hopefully start bringing, for some of my long timers, really start bringing a lot of things together if it hasn't already, between how all of this fits together like a puzzle, right? Like you'll start to see the connections, you'll start to see the origins. So hopefully this is all really it's really bringing a lot together for you right now.
Odds of black revolutionaries to drive into the white residential areas and shoot little children playing on the sidewalks for the sole purpose of drawing out of the white communities violent retaliation into the black communities. Now, this is extremely important to the communists. They must have it, for in this way, they plan to unite the entire Negro population for protection behind the militant minority. It's not a very pretty picture.
So what do you think happened at this point, right? I'm starting to, like, as I'm listening to this, I'm starting to think, so where did the woke people come from, and all these people? How did they get involved in all this, right? And I'm starting to think that the original plan here, because so many good Black Americans stood up and said something about this, or started backing their community out of it, though, of course, nothing's 100%. It may have messed up that plan a little bit. Or maybe it's the fact that the truth of the matter is that blacks and whites actually get along great, and they actually have great relationships. They actually love each other deep down inside. Now, you get into tribalism, you get into groups, you get into where people, communists, whoever, want to subvert the groups, divide the groups. Yeah, there's going to be that initial reaction of feelings. There's going to be some highly militant people on both sides that are just going to, like, and take that hate and run with it, right? But for the most part, the 90%, 99% of us, right, we all get along. We have Black people that we care about. There's Black people that care about us. And our daily interactions are peaceful and fruitful and good, right? So we don't have these feelings like this. So I'm trying to think that it fell apart. So they start to build these different paradigms now. So then it becomes alternative lifestyles versus religious groups, right? That's a big paradigm too. You got the gays versus the Christians, or generally it's just the gays versus the Christians, right? But you start to build these other paradigms that can then form a broken coalition on the other side. So when gays against Christians wasn't good enough, then they had to pull in the trans, and then every fetish under the sun, right? And they make a big alphabet out of it. And then they team up with the BLMs, right? And then so you see how it goes, and mixed in there, we've always seen the elements of Marxism have always been present. Who was running BLM, right? Who do you think is running the LGBTQ thing, right? Who do you think's running it? Nobody can point to a leader, but what do you want to bet? They're a lot like the BLM leaders. I'm just willing to bet on with some odds, right? I don't know for sure, but I'd be willing to bet they're right along the same spectrum, and have a lot of the same goals in mind. But just keep that in mind as we go on. Like I said, this is the beauty part about going back and look at these things, is that you can really start to connect dots, and you can really start to understand how things got to be the way they are. That helps you form the mindset you're going to need to help make solutions in the future, or teach solutions in the future to the younger generation, because it is really all about them.
But it's one we need to understand, so that no matter what happens to us or to our families, God willing, we'll have the strength at least to avoid doing anything that would play further into the hands of the communists. Ladies and gentlemen, the plans and preparations for a communist revolution of force and violence are far advanced. The organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources, and it provides both training and leadership based upon years of experience in many other countries. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. Well, all right, having said this, now I'm going to qualify it somewhat by turning to conclusion number 3. As important as the strategy for violent revolution is, and it certainly cannot be overstressed, nevertheless, the strategy for nonviolent revolution is even more important to the communists and more potentially fatal to us. So let's turn next to that part of the total picture. Ladies and gentlemen, as pointed out previously, the communists can never hope to come to power over the entire United States through a so-called war of national liberation of a minority population. They can capture a large portion of it, and they can create an awful lot of chaos and destruction everywhere else. But to take the country as a whole will require an entirely different approach. The violent revolution becomes of primary value to the communists to the extent to which it can be used to condition the masses psychologically to accept the nonviolent revolution, which is offered supposedly as the only alternative. Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will move the country gradually and legally toward communism.
Hey, Suzanne, did you say Madcore was sending a raid over here? Because I didn't see it. I know my raid is on for anybody who wants to raid me. At least I believe it is. But I didn't see it. I don't know if they're still streaming or not, but
without calling
I'll look for it.
The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism. Well, what is socialism? All right, let's define it. According to the dictionary, socialism is a political concept based upon the principle of government ownership and control of property, the means of production, and the avenues of commerce. But the important thing, as far as this presentation is concerned, is how do the communists define it? And this is where many people are surprised to learn that the communists have an entirely different meaning for the word socialism than the average American has. Did you know that there isn't a single communist country in existence anywhere on earth? That's right, not one. Russia isn't a communist country. Red China isn't. Cuba certainly isn't. These are socialist lands. That's how communist leaders always describe them. You see, according to the teachings of Karl Marx, communism will come to this world only in some future utopian era, when men will have learned to live together in perfect harmony, when they'll no longer be greedy or competitive, when they'll want to share equally with their fellow human beings and have nothing better than anyone else. When this comes to pass, there'll no longer be any need for police or for government of any kind. And then, he said, the state will wither away. When that happens, said Marx, it will be communism. In the meantime, comrades, whenever we come to power, we shall call it socialism. So the next time you hear a communist spokesman stand before a college audience or a TV camera and say innocently that all the communists are doing here in America is working for socialism, you must understand what he means by that word. What he's really saying is all
the billionaires and the billionaires, I'm a social democrat. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? That's why everybody just turned around and called them communist. It's not communism, it's social democracy. Yeah, where did that come from? Where did the socialist part come from? You see, that they don't know that, right? It's just a way for them to again veil their own useful idiots into working against their best interests, against their own best interests. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All the communists are doing is trying to bring to America exactly the same thing they now have in the Soviet Union and Red China. Now, they can call that socialism if they want to, but most Americans, I think, would describe that over there as communism. The new program of the Communist Party on this subject has this to say. The term social...
So he's reading straight out of communist books. So I want to stress the fact that this is firsthand information being given to us, right? So you see how he pulls the firsthand information up? He's reading directly to us from it. This is coming from the communist groups of the times, because people would go in and they'd be asked to come to these groups. They get all this literature. They'd be like, yeah, take it with you. It's a free country, right? You take it with you, and they don't know whether they're, really interested in being communist or whether they're working for the patriot side or whatever, but they get this information, they bring it out. In fact, him himself would go in there and get this information himself and then bring it to the groups to talk about it and to analyze it and have civil discussions like people used to have back then. You notice that he's been sitting there the entire time talking. No one's interrupted him. No one's been talking in the crowd. Everybody's sitting there very politely and listening. This is the way it was done. It was with a lot of class. We've lost the art of of understanding how to listen to someone else and absorb information and not have to involve ourselves. Just think, be cerebral about it, right? We've lost that art of conversation through media and so on over the years. This is what it used to look like. And I tell you, it must have been a lot less stressful to actually have a conversation or try to teach some people something about something, you know? They probably could not come back with you're this or you're that or you don't know this and that. They probably just come back with questions, right? Well, what do you mean by this, sir? You know, that's the way people were trained to interact back then, or were raised to interact back then. And that's if anything we can take from the past, it's the art of conversation and the art of paying attention and listening. That's something we could learn from our ancestors for sure.
Socialism describes but the first stage of a new society that in its full development is called communism. Socialism is a transitional stage. Well, the important question, though, is why do the communists promote socialism? Is it merely because they honestly believe that it's a necessary transitional stage to some higher, more perfect form of society? I don't think so. I doubt very much if the communist leaders believe their own fairy tale. And I'm sure they're not so naive as to believe that their present super state is ever really going to wither away. But they promote socialism just the same because they know that socialism, by definition, means control over people. If the government owns and controls all property, all means of production, and all avenues of commerce, then it controls all people. If we're dependent upon the government for our food, our clothing, our shelter, our jobs, our medical care, then we're far more effectively controlled by those who hold political power than if they stood over us with soldiers and weapons. Some years ago, I happened to attend a meeting where several anti-communist refugees from behind the Iron Curtain were called upon to relate their personal experiences. Some of the questions that came from the audience were rather naive, I suppose, because finally, one of the refugees spoke up and he said, "You know, you Americans have funny ideas about life under communism. Apparently you think there's a communist soldier standing on every street corner with a rifle and bayonet to keep the people in line. But this isn't so." He said, "Oh, sure, in the beginning there were plenty of soldiers and executions and deportations to slave labor camps, but we don't see much of that anymore. The open violence lasted only for about a year or a year and a half, and then the anti-communist leadership was liquidated. And now, to the casual observers, there's a great deal of apparent calm and freedom." For instance, he said, "I lived in the largest city in the country. We had a large park there directly across the street from a beautiful church." He said they left one church open, one in the entire country, primarily for guided tours of visiting Americans who had come to see if religion was being persecuted. He said, "Theoretically, anytime I wanted to, I could have gone into that park, stood on a bench, and spoken out against communism. Then I could have walked across the street into that church and knelt down in prayer, and I wouldn't have been arrested or bothered in any way. But you can be sure I did not do these things, because if I had, the very next day, the wheels of the bureaucracy would have begun to turn, and I would have been informed that my quota of food stamps had been cut, that my allotment for clothing and shoes had been reduced, that my allocation for living quarters had been downgraded, and finally, that my job assignment had been changed from the kind of work for which I'd been trained to menial labor at lower pay. So none of us did any of those things that we were theoretically entitled to do because of the tremendous power that the Communist Party had over our economic existence." And then he said something that I'll never forget. He hesitated for a moment, and weighing his words very carefully so as not to hurt our feelings, he said, "You know, I came to America expecting to find a nation of free men. But instead, I find exactly the same thing. Everywhere I look, I see men and women who know that communists are making headway in this country. They know that something must be done and that someone must stand up to them. But they themselves do nothing. They remain silent because they're afraid that if they speak out or take a stand publicly, it'll be bad for business. They may lose a client. They may even lose their jobs. Or perhaps they're receiving a regular government check and already are too dependent upon some of the very people and programs they know they should oppose. And then he said, these men voluntarily have gone behind the Iron Curtain. They're already taken over by the communists. The only difference is that for the present at least, they can still get out any time they really want to, and we could not. I think there's a great lesson to be learned from that because it's true, isn't it? There are many men who are physically brave beyond any question when it comes to standing up against a tyranny that threatens with armies. Some of them carry the actual scars of battle to prove it. But when it comes to this new kind of war, they're lost to the fight.
Truer words have never been spoken. Truer words have never been spoken. So what do? They complain and vote, right? But we move beyond that with solution culture, right? We vote, we talk about it, but then we do stuff about it where we can as well. And part of that is just having knowledge, because knowledge is power. But it's also knowing where to strike and where to remove the enablement of the system itself. And that's why we learn.
When there is no battlefield, when the weapons are not rifles or bombs, but economic pressures, then who is your enemy? How do you fight? Where do you begin? It's precisely for these reasons that any modern dictatorship must have control over the economic sphere of all human activity. This was true of Nazism, it was true of fascism, it's true of communism, and it's also true of socialism. Regardless of what name we give it, total government control is by definition totalitarianism. That's what the word means. Now, Leon Trotsky, as you recall, was one of the original Bolsheviks who led the communist revolution in Russia.
Trotsky also the patriarch or whatever you want to call him, the leader or the inventor of the neoconservative movement, or the icon of the neoconservative movement. So just keep that in mind as well. Another reason we don't want the neocons to ever get back in control of the right, because if they do, if we screw this one up, we'll never have a true collection. We'll never have a real choice again as far as our leadership goes. They'll lock that party down just like they locked out the Democrat Party, and they'll close all the loopholes, and they'll make sure that an anti-establishment president never gets in the door again. So just keep that in mind as the elections do roll up, and when you start to get hit with all the propaganda and all the election campaigning and so on, that know them by their enemies, know them by their associations, know them by their funding, and don't ever, whether you like the guy or not, don't ever let the neocons back on the right, or just go ahead and prepare for the worst.
In 1937, Trotsky wrote a book entitled The Revolution Betrayed. And in this book, here's what he said. The basis of bureaucratic rule is the poverty of society in objects of consumption. When there is enough goods in a store, the purchasers can come whenever they want to. When there is little goods, the purchasers are compelled to stand in line. When the lines are very long, it's necessary to appoint a policeman to keep order. Such is the starting point of the power of the Soviet bureaucracy. It knows who is to get something and who has to wait. And ladies and gentlemen, there's no better description than that of why the communists work to promote socialism. No matter whose definition you use, under socialism, those who run the government, and the communists are confident that in America they eventually will be the ones who do so, those who run the government will know who is to get something and who has to wait, and that represents control over human beings. What has all this to do with the communist revolution in America? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has everything to do with it, because the building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. No matter what grievance we may have, real or imagined, no matter what national problems we may face, the communists seize upon these as excuses to build socialism. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. And forgive me for saying it one more time, total government is communism. Again, let's turn to the record. Shortly after the Watts riot in 1965, the Communist Party brought out this pamphlet entitled The Watts Upsurge, a Communist Appraisal. And here is what it said. The challenge of the Watts explosion can be met only by a truly massive program, a vast increase in the investments in the War Against Poverty program. What is called for is not only a total economic opportunity program for wiping out unemployment and for proper job training, but a program for the total reconstruction of the area. Now, the People's World, the official West Coast newspaper of the Communist Party, in its August 28, 1965 issue, ran this rather interesting editorial. What is needed now is an effort that begins to approximate the magnitude of the problem. As a minimum, such a program should demand massive emergency action by the federal government. Well, then, 6 months later, after this particular article, the Communist Party came out with this. It's called The New Program of the Communist Party, but this was the first draft, published in 1966. And here's what it said. We favor full use of federal powers to achieve these objectives. Now, as I read this, listen carefully to see if it doesn't sound familiar, perhaps like something you've heard from more respectable sources.
Now check it out, man. This all relates to what's going on today. So when you listen to this stuff, just remember it's all relative.
Government assumption of responsibility for assuring a guaranteed annual wage. Complete cradle-to-the-grave social insurance coverage, including all medical care. Equal educational opportunities for all, with acceptance of the principle of student stipends. A national reconstruction plan to end ghettos and slums and provide the nation with a modern rapid transit system operated as a public service. And passage of a National Youth Act that will ensure education, vocational training, and employment at decent wages for the younger generation. Does that sound familiar? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if it reminds you somewhat of the Great Society, it's because it is the Great Society, lock, stock, and barrel.
Hi, Rabbit.
Gus Hall, head of the Communist Party, explained it this way. This is the January 24th, 1965 issue of The Worker, and Gus Hall said, "The communist attitude toward the Great Society can be summarized in an old saying that two men sleeping in the same bed can have different dreams. We communists support every measure of the Great Society concept because we dream of socialism." And when you recall what Gus Hall means when he says socialism, then you realize that the communists support the welfare programs of the Great Society, the New Deal, the New Frontier, or whatever they decide to call it in the future, because they dream of bringing communism to America through these programs. The next question of importance is, how do the communists promote socialism? Certainly it takes far more than a mere declaration of intent, more than writing a few books. How can they bring it off, especially when there are so few of them? How can they manipulate the vast majority into accepting socialism when they really don't want it? Well, here again we find that they have a plan. The strategy is precise and well tested. It's called revolutionary parliamentarianism. Now, the general strategy employed is a political pincers movement, and these are the terms the communists use to describe it. A pincers movement applying political pressure from above and from below. Now, when they talk about pressure from above, they mean using their people and their influence within the very government marked for takeover to bring forward official recommendations for legislation. These come from the highest possible levels and carry the full prestige of the government. The recommendations, of course, are offered supposedly as solutions to national problems. But when passed into law, their only real effect is to vastly increase the power of government and to move the country that much closer toward the ultimate goal.
Sounds like 8 years of Obama, doesn't it?
The pressure from below, then, involves using their influence over the various mass membership organizations of the country to create the appearance of great popular support for these recommendations. Of course, the members of those organizations must never suspect that they're being used to promote the communist program. Now, the silent majority, the average person with no particular axe to grind, is caught right in the middle. He looks above and sees highly respected spokesmen for government calling for socialist legislation. He looks below and sees mobs of demonstrators shouting for the same thing. He says to himself, has everyone gone crazy, or is it me? Now, he's still in the majority, of course, but he doesn't know it. He thinks he's helplessly outnumbered, and he bows to what he thinks is the democratic will of the majority. All that remains, then, is for the duly elected legislators to place their own careers and political expediency above the best interests of the nation, to yield to this political pressure and pass the legislation into law. Then the whole process starts all over again with new recommendations from above, new demands from below, and finally, new capitulation in the halls of Congress. In this way, the nation can move to the left in giant strides until the ultimate goal of communism itself is reached entirely legally through the constitutional process and in the name of the nation. Now, this government pamphlet entitled The New Role of National Legislative Bodies in the Communist Conspiracy is a reprint of 2 chapters taken from a communist textbook used in Czechoslovakia. It was written by Jan Kozak, the historian and theoretician of the Czechoslovakian Communist Party. This is one of the manuals used to teach communist cadre how the tactic of revolutionary parliamentarianism was used successfully in Czechoslovakia and how it might be applied to other countries as well. So as I read this, even though Kozak is speaking of how they did it in Czechoslovakia, think in terms of how the same strategy might be used, or perhaps is being used, right here in America. Kozak said, "The pressure from above successfully employed by our workers' class was the use made of the organs holding powers, the government, parliament, national committees, for bringing about a wide popularization of revolutionary demands and slogans. The fact that such demands and recommendations emanated directly from the highest state organs had a strong influence on their popularization. Whereas pressure from above is the pressure exerted by the organs of the state, pressure from below is the pressure exerted by the popular masses. The united mass organizations, which were led and influenced to a large extent by the communists, represented in this way the direct reserves of the party. All the old proven forms of the struggle were employed: calling of protest meetings, passing of resolutions, sending of delegations, organizing mass demonstrations, and also eventually using strikes, including general strikes. The pressure from below made it impossible for the other parties which had numerical superiority to isolate the communists and to stop the revolution. Thus, it made up for the numerical weakness of the revolutionary representatives. Progress toward socialism may take under these circumstances a democratic and constitutional course. All the changes which in their entirety represent a revolutionary transformation of the capitalist society into a socialist one will proceed absolutely legally and in the name of the nation."
Just like today.
Is it possible, do you suppose, that revolutionary parliamentarianism is being used against America today? Is there any evidence of this kind of pressure from above? Well, ladies and gentlemen, all you have to do to answer that question is read some of the official reports and recommendations that have been pouring out in a steady stream for years from the bureaus, special agencies, and commissions of the federal government. Consider, for example, just those reports issued by the various President's Commissions. The President's Commission on Automation, the President's Commission on Crime, the President's Commission on Civil Rights, to name just a few. Now, this is perhaps the most classic recent example. It's the report of the President's National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, better known as the Kerner Report, released to the public.
When's the last time you sat down and watched someone deliver a report like this with all firsthand information? I mean, literally pulling the words from the writers themselves of the time, active. All this stuff was active on the street, being used at the time. And just sat down with book after book after book after book and showing you exactly what they're doing. No guesswork, no commentary, nothing. It's just like basically in their own words, spelling out the plan. It's really refreshing to see this level of investigative journalism, really, and what we should strive for. Like literally not just taking I mean, even a news article is almost second or third hand information at this point these days. Just keep that in mind. I mean, really diligent work by this man.
Public in March of 1968. Have you read this? It's incredible. The list of recommendations supposedly to remove the causes of civil disorders in America reads almost identical to the new program of the Communist Party. And that's not much of an exaggeration either. It calls for the vast expansion of all welfare programs and agencies. It suggests absorbing all city, county, and state welfare programs into one gigantic federal welfare program. And why have state socialism when you can have national socialism? It calls for a government-guaranteed minimum wage. It calls for federal financing and control of every conceivable sphere of human activity: education, housing, transportation, even insurance policies. It calls for strict gun control laws and even recommends the creation of a national police force. Naturally, it doesn't call it that by name. It refers to it as the National Law Enforcement Center. But there's no doubt as to what its ultimate form will be, especially since it's to operate in conjunction with the Defense Department. But the most incredible...
So all those things happened, and I'm guessing the last part is what, the NSA? I mean, all those things he just said happened or still happen. They still want to call for what the socialist candidate calls for. Now they're going to call for universal basic income because of AI, and they're going to call. Of course, they were just calling for a higher minimum wage last election and the election before that as well. As a it's always like Bernie Sanders who's putting that out there, and then the establishment will adopt it and let it fester. But yeah, you just, now that you're hearing all this, right, and you realize 1969 here, it's easy to connect the dots and see, wow, all these things happened. Like this guy was on top of it a long time ago.
The incredible thing about this report, I think, is not the list of...
Hold on, I got a question here. Winning, do you think communism denies individual or civil liberties and rights? Yeah, absolutely. Because it doesn't allow for private property, for one, right off the bat. And then the state in communism is the one who gives you your rights, not your life. So that's the difference between liberty and versus authoritarianism is, and like we talked about in the sixth fail, is that idea of enslavement versus free will. All right, so people equals life equals rights, or people equal property, right? It's that two. It's a paradigm between those two ideas, right? That drive the ideas that go into our society and how people tend to make ideas, whether they believe in one thing or another, or whether they follow one thing or another. It all connects back. So I would say no. I don't believe that there's any rights, individual rights and civil liberties in communism. But that can be, I guess, debated as in, what do you mean? Like, yeah, you can decide when you want to go to the bathroom, right? in most cases, I'm sure. You know, you can't decide what you can say or what you can buy or what you can or that you can own property, or where you, in the worst case scenarios, where you can actually travel to, because it's about full spectrum dominance and full cradle to grave, right? Only from cradle to grave. Healthcare is one way to do that, as well as control of the monetary system and control over travel, control over, you know, then you use social pressure or bottom pressure for to keep people in line, right? So you have a snitch society. You have all these other things that are going on to that people will engage in to better their situation in a despot situation, in a despot society. So yeah, I do believe that there's not a lot of individual or civil liberties under communism.
The recommendations. That's almost expected from groups of this kind nowadays. The real shocker lies in its findings, the discoveries it made. Here was a body of men, highly respected, with the prestige and financial resources of the federal government at their disposal. Their task was to uncover all of the causes of civil disorders in our land, and to do so impartially with favor or malice to no one, let the chips fall where they may. Now, would you suppose that the Communist Party played some tiny, microscopic role in the riots, the campus disorders, the assaults against police?
I mean, is he talking about the 60s or today? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's just amazing the parallels between what he talks about, what Yuri talks about, and how you can just see it all around you today. That's why the work of what he did back then, his work back then is very important, and as well as Yuri's work. It really, the red pills just come flying in when you watch this stuff.
Well, you're mistaken. Just because the leaders of these revolutionary movements carry the Viet Cong flag, pay homage to Che Guevara, travel frequently to Moscow and Peking, preach against capitalism, promote the building of socialism, follow the communist line without deviation, and move in perfect unison in every major city, that doesn't prove anything. According to the Kerner report, the communists are playing absolutely no role at all in civil disorders. Look it up in the index. Here's a book with over 600 pages of fine print dealing with all of the causes of civil turmoil. And the words communism or communist aren't found even once. Not even to say that they looked into it and found it not to be an important factor, which is the expected cliche today. Apparently, the internal threat of communism is no longer even worth looking into. But what about the other half of the pincers? Is there any evidence of pressure from below? Well, consider the nature of such things as the mass action tactics of the Selma March of 1965, the various peace marches and civil rights marches held in almost every major city in the intervening years, the Poor People's Campaign and Resurrection City. What are these? Do they truly represent an expression of the majority of Americans, or are they merely well-organized pressure groups putting on an impressive show to create the illusion of vast popular support? And what effect does this have on Congress? Every time there's a new show of strength, doesn't Congress buckle under the political pressure and pass into law the recommendations previously made by some commission or agency of the federal government? And
like every day, right? It seems like every day.
hasn't the silent majority been caught between these pincers? And hasn't the country been taking giant strides to the left through our constitutional process and in the name of the nation? The entire process was best described, I think, by Martin Luther King. He wrote an article for Saturday Review, which appeared in the April 3rd, 1965 issue. And here is how he described it. The goal of the demonstrations in Selma, as elsewhere, is to dramatize the existence of injustice and to bring about the presence of justice by means of nonviolence. Long years of experience indicate to us that Negroes can achieve this goal when four things occur. 1, nonviolent demonstrators go into the streets to exercise their constitutional rights. 2, racists resist by unleashing violence against them. 3, Americans of conscience, in the name of decency, demand federal intervention and legislation. And 4, the administration, under mass pressure, initiates measures of immediate intervention and remedial legislation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a perfect description of how pressure from below is being used in America today to further the nonviolent proletarian revolution. You know, it always bothers me when I have to agree with the communists. It doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while, I'll read something in the communist press that is 100% correct. It comes out in their favor even without their having to lie about it. And here's an example. In the People's World, the January 29, 1966 issue, the communists said, "The problem is that the power structure that runs both of the old political parties seems to have great difficulty in comprehending what is taking place in the Negro freedom movement. They don't know a revolution when they see one." And all I can say to that is amen. They sure don't. They call it everything under the sun except a revolution. And they're the same people, by and large, who still tell you it can't happen here. Ladies and gentlemen, not only can it happen here, not only is it happening here, but it has been happening here for years. The problem is that most of us haven't been able to recognize a revolution in all of its forms when we saw one. Well, all right, so what do we do about it? What are the countermeasures that need to be taken? And where do we begin? We begin by knowing what not to do, because if we do the wrong things, obviously that's worse than doing nothing at all. For example, as I'm sure everyone here is well aware, we must not be led into placing the blame for the riots, the civil disorders, on the Negro people of our nation. Even those few who are promoting hatred and violence in the black communities are not themselves the cause. They're merely being used by forces far bigger than they are to promote the violent phase of the revolution in America. Just as many white people are being used, I might add, by those same forces to promote the nonviolent phase. Secondly, and this too almost goes without saying, we mustn't resort to violence either as a means of furthering political or social goals. And we must do everything humanly possible to discourage others from doing so.
So base, man, even back in the day. The original base dude right here.
Third, we must not be fooled into thinking that the causes of our civil turmoil are such things as poverty, poor housing, lack of education, and similar social or economic factors. As a matter of fact, most of today's self-styled revolutionaries, black and white, come from good homes, could earn better than average incomes if they wanted to work. And in fact, they're products of some of the finest institutions of higher learning. We shouldn't be indifferent to the social and economic conditions of those in need, and we should do all we can within the concepts of economic and political freedom to improve those conditions. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking that these are the causes of our national problems today. Fourth, we must not look to the expansion of government and government programs as the solution. As I hope I've made it clear by now, this is exactly what the communists want us to do, because it's the very process whereby they hope to come to power in this country through nonviolent means. These are the things we must not do. What then does that leave on the positive side? Well, first of all, and perhaps most obvious of all, we must support our local police. But that means a lot more than just putting a bumper sticker on the car. It means taking an active interest in civic affairs to ensure that the police aren't saddled with so-called civilian review boards. Nothing can be quite so damaging to police morale and efficiency as converting every arrest into a trial of the policeman instead of the criminal. To support your local police also means making sure they remain independent of control from Washington. And don't forget, whatever the federal government finances today, it shall control tomorrow. Next on the list, we must recapture the American faith in the free enterprise system. Capitalism has become almost a dirty word in some places, mainly because its defenders were busy enjoying the fruits of capitalism, while its enemies were busy writing books and giving lectures. Consequently, capitalism has retreated steadily before the onslaught of socialism, and now is struggling for its very existence. Young and old, we must become students again and study the theories of Madison and Jefferson, Bastiat and von Mises, just as intently as our enemies pursue the pages of Marx and Lenin, Galbraith and Keynes. Not only must we become grounded in theory, but we must become advocates and spokesmen as well. We must know what we stand for as well as what we oppose. Next, and this is probably the most difficult task of all, we must carry this message regarding the dual nature of communist revolution to our friends, our neighbors, our business associates, and everyone who will listen. Now, this is hard by and large because people don't want to
Tucker
hear
has a
it.
bow tie.
It's bad news. It spoils, makes the parties possible. And that means accepting our personal responsibility to do everything we humanly can do to carry the truth about civil turmoil to every man, woman, and child in America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, none of these proposals will produce results, and nothing else you may suggest will do so either, unless and until we get right down to the heart of the problem, the life force of the revolution itself. We must discover the identity of those individuals, both above and below, who consciously are furthering the communist program for revolution, and then remove them from their positions of trust and leadership. Anything less than that will be totally futile, because we'll merely be running around trying to put out 1 or 2 fires over here, while they're busy setting 10 new ones over there. Now, of course, the minute you begin to think along these lines, you'll become the target of a whole barrage of attacks. You'll be called a witch hunter, a McCarthyite, a right-wing extremist, and other delicate phrases that are well designed to intimidate the average person into silence.
Just like today.
If that doesn't work, then you'll be called a fascist, or at least a dictator, because supposedly you want to deny basic constitutional freedoms to a small group of Americans just because they happen to hold political views that are different from yours. How many times have you heard that? And you know, at first it sounds almost convincing, but the argument is a trap. And the bait inside that trap is the hidden assertion that the Communist Party is merely a political party. Now, if it were a political party and that's all, then of course we would have to grant them all the same constitutional rights and immunities as other loyal American citizens. But if the Communist Party is not a political party, if it is in fact a supranational organization dedicated to world conquest, if in addition to political means, it also uses military means, economic means, propaganda means, bribery, blackmail, treason, murder, and any other means that suit its purposes, then its members are not political by nature, are not loyal to the United States, and have no legal or moral claim to constitutional liberties.
And that's what I've been saying for a while. Like, when you're using subversion with the intention of demoralizing, destabilizing a country to bring it to crisis in order to change it, to fundamentally change it into an ideology that works with the foreign ideology you're with, that's an act of war. That's what I'm always saying. Subversion is an act of war. And I've been trying to really make this point for a long time, is that, you know, people waiting for bullets to fly to call it a war, right, are waiting until it's too late to do something about it. Just because we see it in other countries and we've gotten accustomed to that as we've grown up doesn't mean that's how it's going to work here or how it's working here, right? So, you know, how do you deal with something like that in a free society? He's got it nailed right here. It has to. You have to look at the elements of it and say, is this just a political party, an idea, or is this a movement to actually to have some traitorous results, right? It would be traitorous results if it was coming from inside the country by Americans to Americans, right? So that's you know, and somewhere in the solution, it's got to be that idea that subversion used for malicious purposes, right, by a foreign country or a foreign ideology it doesn't fall under constitutional protection. And I think that's where we get in a fight with each other over it. Well, no, you can't do that, and you can't do that. Well, no, honestly, if you understand how warfare works, it's almost got to be part of it. I don't know what the exact solution is for this or how it's going to look, but it has to be included, or this just happens over and over and over again. Remember, generational warfare. One thing he's not really bringing up that I will is that it's generational warfare. They go after the younger ones. They get them in college. They get them in elementary, now down to elementary school, right? And they changed it there, like the board says, right? Subvert the young, change the culture.
There's no such thing as absolute freedom. For every liberty, an equal and opposite restraint is required. For example, in order for us to enjoy freedom of speech, it's necessary to deny others the freedom to come in here and break up this meeting. The logic of liberty is that it must stop short of the liberty to destroy itself. And if we're to preserve the freedoms we cherish in this land, then we mustn't be tricked by clever propagandists into giving the Communist Party the freedom it seeks to destroy freedom for us all. Well,
now, if we'd only taken his advice back then, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to close this presentation with two observations that I know you may not want to hear, but they must be made nevertheless. The first is that this struggle in which we're now engaged, in a very real sense, is more deadly than war. Call it what you will, Cold War, revolution, struggle, whatever. The present stakes are higher than in any other war we've ever known. After all, why do we dread war? Well, there are three reasons: death, destruction, and human suffering. But ladies and gentlemen, if communism should ever come to America, we'll face more death, destruction, and human suffering than any people in history has ever faced at the hands of their invading conquerors. And it would make no difference whether the road to communism were traveled violently or non-violently. The so-called expropriation of the capitalists that would lie at the end of that road would constitute one of the greatest bloodbaths of history. Now, the second observation is related to the first. It is simply that we have now passed the point of painless solutions and parlor patriotism. There was a time, and not too long ago, I think, when we could have pulled ourselves out of this without too great a sacrifice on the part of anyone. All that would have been necessary would have been for us to take an interest in the domestic affairs of our nation and to insist that our elected representatives merely enforce the laws that were then on the books to protect us from internal subversion and to keep the enemy outside the gates. But we didn't. Instead, we slept. And one by one, those laws were stricken down by the Supreme Court. Congress failed to repair the damage, and our defenses are no more.
I'd be interested in knowing what those laws were. I mean, maybe that's part of the solution, is getting some of those laws back in place. I'll have to look into that.
Now the enemy is inside our gates. He is on our streets. He is in our halls of parliament. And now there is hell to pay. Our enemy is not going to leave quietly just because we suddenly discover him and ask him to go. Hardly. The nature of tyranny is such that, like the barb on an arrow, it goes in easily. But the price of pulling it out is a piece of flesh. Now let me be more specific. Before we finally win this battle, and I should hasten to say that there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to win. I'm increasingly convinced of this. But before we finally do see victory, it's now inevitable that some of us, even in this room, will lose our lives in the communist revolution that already is raging around us. I can't tell you who it's going to be, of course. But I can tell you that it'll make no practical difference whether we're resisting at the time or whether we're merely trying to hide. Most of the casualties will occur because people just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, I mention this not to suggest that we all grab our guns and groceries and head to the hills. In many ways, this too would be playing right into the hands of the communists. No, I mention it for only one reason, and that is to stress the seriousness of the challenge that now confronts this nation. It's literally a question of life and death for all of us. And it's about time the American people began to face up to that fact and to act accordingly. I have no idea of what each of you is going to do in the critical days that lie ahead. It may be much, it may be little, it may be nothing at all. I don't know. Only you can answer that question. But ladies and gentlemen, whatever it is you decide to do for your country, do it soon. Do it now. Every minute that you delay further will add dearly to the price of ultimate victory. Thank you.
All right. There you have it. G. Edward Griffin, More Deadly Than War, an epic gathering lecture, if you will, in 1969. Went viral a few years ago because of how accurate it was. And now you guys know the information in it too. Hard to believe how much forewarning we had to what was going on today. And I think just because people don't see the Soviet Union and they don't see that that face any longer, even, and they don't see China as the face of it in the same way, right? Like I remember growing up, the Soviet Union looked very militant, looked very scary, right? It looked like it was a huge powerhouse, and that it was and that, you know, we were seriously at an even match with them. I don't know that that was ever true, but it sure did come across that way, right? It seemed very militant. It seemed like everybody was in on it, dude, and it seemed like the whole country was part of it. Then you grow up and you realize that those people are forced in those beliefs, forced to go along with that stuff. Then you get even older and you realize, well, you know, they let that stuff happen on their watch to them because because of something, right? And then you see what's going on around here, and you see how many people are apathetic to it and choose entertainment over education. Want to just vote and complain and vote and complain, instead of actually getting to work. Even back in 1969, G. Edward Griffin was talking about solution culture, talking about getting involved, doing something then, heading off, preventative measures, you know, really out ahead of it. And again, we're doing the same thing today. You know, but we're looking at the bigger picture, the results of this. Now, the globalists are people that are like, you know, that operate on a business that's worldwide, or a worldwide type of business, or just have several different citizenships around the world. Don't really have an allegiance to one country, say. You know, those people don't, you know, communism can be everywhere or nowhere. Doesn't matter. It's just enabling the basically the discourse, the division, the distractions, the destabilizations, and countries all around the world. That benefits them. That lets them in the door. That lets them keep the corruption rolling. All that stuff, man. So it's an enablement mechanism, right? And at the end, it's an enablement mechanism. So education's the key here. Understanding, and getting it back to not being cool, right? Like people want to go to college and believe it's cool to be part of this stuff. They think they buy into all the bullshit that's there. It's neatly laced inside of their academics. I remember I have a book from my undergrad where I was highlighting some of these Marxist passages as the first time I'd ever seen it in books, right? I remember it striking me going, whoa, what's that? And I highlighted it in a book and said, that's odd that that's there. It's just thrown in this proletariat kind of language in the middle of this media analysis book, right? And I was like, wow, it popped out to me at that time. I was like, what is this? I don't know what this is, but this sounds interesting, right? And digging into it more and more and more, you end up finding out what it is. But I never fell for that stuff to begin with. Though, some of the ideas did capture my attention from time to time and find myself trying them out. A lot of times I'll try out ideas on people just to see, well, what do you think of this? Or like the conversation will come up and I'll bring up one of those points and see how they react and what it is as a way to learn more about it. These days, more inclined to just go do the research and look it up. But back then when you got other things in your mind, it's a little bit easier to do it that way. But yeah, so much of it, right? We had a foresight on it, and we still have foresight on it today. We can look ahead and say, hey, how can we solve these problems? Now, what are we going to do? Are we going to sit back and complain and vote? Or are we going to actually start to do things in our world to change this? It starts with education. This is what we're doing here with Unveiling Reality. This is why this information in this show is so unique. You're not going to get a lot of this information and a lot of these type of talking, these type of analysis anywhere else. Like, you can go to, people that are just talking about what's going on today, but you're not going to get any of this. And this is where it really matters, because people have been worried about what's going on at the moment for a long time, but never looking deeply into it and looking down the road or looking at things from a generational perspective, which is exactly how the people that they're complaining about do. Right. So you have a hard time fighting a battle when the battlefield isn't where you are. You're trying to react to situations more than get in front of them and prevent situations. But that's what G. Edward Griffin was really trying to say here. He's like, we have time to get in front of this. Now, this precedes the Uri stuff, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. But first, I'd like to announce that we have a word from our sponsor here. We actually have a sponsor tonight. And if you know me, this is probably going to be a parody, but here you go. Here's our new sponsor, ladies and gentlemen, Trump Pizza.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you about the most incredible pizza you've ever tasted. It's the Trump Supreme Pizza. And let me tell you, it's tremendous. Picture this, folks, a golden crust, perfectly crispy on the outside, made here in the United States and not in China. Our pizza is delightfully fluffy on the inside. It's a pizza crust that will make your taste buds dance with joy. The toppings on the Trump Supreme Pizza are second to none, folks. We're talking about the finest, freshest ingredients. Tiny hamburgers, tangy tomato sauce, and a variety of mouth-watering toppings that will leave you speechless. And that's not all, folks. With one bite from our new presidential pizza, you won't forget where you are and fall constantly on the stairs. Now that's one truly patriotic pizza, Trump Supreme Pizza. Make pizza great again.
All right. So yeah, pick up some Trump Pizza today. It helps the channel. Yeah, right. I thought it'd be funny. Just a nice little break this up a little bit. But now we're going to look at the anomaly. Yeah, you guys know who Anomaly is? He does news analysis and hip hop. That's what it says. I like the kid, man. He's cool. Don't agree 100% on everything, but I don't let that get in the way a lot of times either. I still think he has the right ideas and is heading in the right direction with what he's doing. But here is his follow-up and interview. And these are just short sections, by the way. We're not going to go into an hour-long thing. This one's like 8 minutes. Next one's like 12. But this is real quick. So he's going to talk about this interview, that lecture he just did. But, this was done in 1 year ago. So this is from 1 year ago. So here we go. Let me pull this up and get this on the screen. So if you don't know Anomaly, check him out. He's cool. He's a cool dude. You like him. So anyways, yeah, here it is. I'll comment on it as we go, but he's talking about the same video we just watched, as you can see right here.
I thought it would be cool because this is one of my favorite videos of yours. Do you know what year this is from?
Oh, that looks to me like More Deadly Than War. Is that it?
It's when you
In which
talk
case
about the communists and
yeah, that would
the
be
racial division and color communism, common sense.
Yeah, that would be 1969, I believe.
Wow. We're going to play the clip, and then I just want to get your reaction to it because it's gone viral recently because of the accuracy.
Okay, I really want to get, I got to discuss this. I really want to get G. Edward Griffin on my channel. Like, if anybody knows how to do this or knows Anomaly, or I even left a message. I was like, how'd you get him on? I'd really love to have him on, man. It would be monumental. It would be bigger than a lot, probably the biggest interview of my life, man. I would love to have this guy on. So if you could help me in any way, I'll love you forever.
Of what you were talking about versus really what happened, I think, in 2020 with the riots and such. We'll play it, and then I wanted to see your reaction.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, communists called
I'm going to
not
fast
only
forward
for
that since we just
extensive
saw
chaos
that.
within
Okay.
the
All right.
There we go. We know what he said.
Yeah. Excuse me, it's been a long time since I've seen that. Yeah, I'm so happy to see that it went viral. I mean, I produced that, you know, back in '69, I think it was, and you know, we sold a few copies. I think it was on VHS tape, and you know, we were trying to get the word out, right? And I don't know, we probably sold a couple hundred copies, and nobody cared much because they didn't see it. They couldn't imagine that anything I was saying was true. They didn't use the word or the phrase conspiracy theorist in those days, but they might as well have, because they just said this is not true. This is a kooky view of history. They talked about people like me wearing tinfoil hats and so forth, seeing a commie under every bed. These were all slogans, and people really wanted to hear that because they didn't want to believe what I was saying was true.
When you've heard about this whole like McCarthyism and all that stuff that was going on at the time, probably not very often did you think G. Edward Griffin was probably one of the people they were talking about in the past as well. Like that was part of it. He was probably making a lot of noise back then, and they would probably play, oh, that kook, this, that, right? But looking at the results today, we know that he was on target.
Much better to believe this other thing, and since that was coming from higher levels of authority than mine, I'm just a nobody. People did believe that. So the video languished. It just sort of sat there, and then years later, decades later, somebody called me on the phone and said, "Hey Ed, you know one of your old videos is going viral on the internet?" I said, "No kidding. Which one?" And they told me. I said, "What was that? Oh yeah, I remember that." And so that's how it happened. Because now, as I mentioned before, people can see it now. It's right in your face. But in those days, it was across the ocean and around the horizon and in a different era, all that stuff. So my reaction to that is I'm delighted that this is going viral. And I just hope that everybody sees it and realizes that this is conspiracy, not theory, but history. This is
Conspiracy
the
history.
conspirators themselves make no bones about it. They do write their own stuff. You saw me referring to some communist pamphlets and booklets that they themselves published. It's amazing because all of these conspirators at some point have to put their ideas either into print or they have to deliver them verbally to somebody. And if you're diligent enough and you're looking through the archives, the historical archives, you find quite often you'll find their documents, like I did here. Of course, in these days, I had gone to the communist bookstore in Los Angeles. I think it was called the People's Bookshop down on Larchmont Street, and I hung out with the comrades for a little while, letting them think that I was really interested in possibly joining their ranks. I didn't really tell them that, but they assumed that was the reason I was there. But you saw the video. I'm a professional guy, right? I'm a corporate guy. I've got the suit on, real narrow tie, sideburns, the whole thing you had in those days. So when I walked into the bookstore down there in Larchmont, I stood out like a sore thumb. But they thought, oh, good, we got an inroad into the corporate world now. And so I read their books, and that's where I got this stuff, most of it right from their bookstore. So anyway, yeah, looking back on it, it's refreshing to see that now these ideas are really being of interest to people, more and more people. When something goes viral, and I mean millions of people watch this thing, and I guess it's still going around, that's a very enheartening thing for me, because now I don't have to go around grabbing people by the lapels and say, listen to me, I got to tell you something. They just click on their computers. That's why they're banning all these things from the internet. The conspirators, call them what they are, do not want this kind of information to be seen, which is why all of the freedom of speech stuff is happening right now.
I say I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a book reader and a history learner. You know, you inspired me to read that book. It's nice too, because it's nice and thin. So it's not a hard read, Color, Communism, and Common Sense. I've made some videos about it, got a lot of views. A lot of people told me to read it. Do you remember that book? Because when I read it, I was like, wow, it was so clear, so concise, and very relevant to what's going on. And it was written in the early 1900s.
Yeah. Yeah, Manning Johnson was quite a guy. I never did have a chance to meet him in person. I think he was already deceased by this time, but there have been others that have come out and told their story as well. And when you're making a film, you just don't have time to go into all of it. And people don't, they don't have that much attention span to sit there for 4 or 5 hours while you read stuff from books. It's not going to
Totally.
go.
Well, speaking of one video that's also gone viral, the Yuri Bezmenov video, which.
All right. Let me get that one up here real quick. I got that one next. Actually, it might just actually spilled right over to it if I just waited. Hold on. There you go. This one's a little different. It's from a different interview. Yeah, I think it's done two. This one's from 2 years ago. So this is like his first video interview with him. But I like this part too. So let me get that up. So yeah, he's actually done 2 interviews with him, man. Lucky guy. I want to do it. Want to do it? All right. And here we go. So this is really good. I like this one too because he really gets in depth about Yuri.
Which is just gone.
It helps if I share the screen.
I think the best video on the internet, your interview with Yuri Bezmenov, which is just gone. I don't even know if you could calculate.
Oh, thank you, Rabbit.
Call of Duty,
awesome.
I think, used it recently too.
Okay, there we go. I just gotta get some money together.
Can you tell me about that? Why you sat down with him and how that came to be, and just a little bit about that, because people love that interview. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that, or the unfunny thing about that, is that when I first recorded Yuri and recorded him on videotape, nobody was interested in it, and I thought this is very disappointing. Because everybody was in those days, at the stage, oh, communism. Are you one of those guys that's concerned about communism? Come on, communism is gone. You know that. When the Berlin Wall is down or coming down, the communists are fools or foolish. Well, come on, you're one of those conspiracy theorists. So nobody was interested, But I had the recording, so I just stuck it away. And it wasn't until maybe 10, 15 years later, somebody asked me about it. I thought, oh, well, maybe somebody's interested. So I put it on tape, VHS tape, and I guess we sold a couple of thousand copies, which is nothing. And then it just lay there languishing all this time until about a year ago, all of a sudden it's going viral on the internet. I didn't know it. And now, as you say, it's becoming the theme of a major game. And Call of Duty.
The time bomb is ticking. That every second,
this was amazing.
Disaster is coming closer and closer. The danger is real.
And I
Yuri
guess
in a video game
was
was
7 million
amazing.
people on the first day they released the promotion for it. You look at the promotion, sure enough, there's excerpts of my video interviewing of Yuri Bezmenov on it. So it's encouraging actually to see this happen, and it reminds me of the old adage.
Awesome. Thank you, Rabbit. Will do.
People sometimes they have to suffer a little bit and hurt before they get serious about a topic.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological
Thanks, Blair. Hope you're doing well.
What do they mean?
Hang in there.
Ideological subversion is the
cool.
process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it.
Reminds me of the joke.
Yuri is the real red
This
pill.
city guy that visited a farmer friend, and they had the donkey out there, and the guy wanted to get the donkey to move into the barn, and so he picked up a big board and he just whacked the donkey, or I guess the mule. I've forgotten which it was. One of them
mule.
is smart, and one of them isn't. Let's just say the donkey, and the donkey staggered to its knees and then got up and went into the barn. And the city guy says, well, "What did you do that for?" And it hit that poor donkey over the head with that big board and almost killed him. And he said, "Well, yeah, but the donkey will do what you tell him to do, but first you have to get his attention." Well, I've often thought people are like that. if they're living in a very comfortable society, they got all these appliances and all these luxuries and all these freedoms, and you discover that somebody is planning to take all that away, and you read the strategy, you know what the playbook is, and you see it happening, but still people are enjoying life. Everything is still good. They don't want to hear this. Yeah, they think you're crazy. They
Yep. Happy-go-luckyism.
don't want to hear it first of all, and it sounds so bizarre that it's hard to convince them to even take the time to examine it. So now we come to the point where, all right, we're being hit over the head with a board right now. So I think that's partly what's happening, is that people are going, whoa, what was that? What's going on? Now they're taking a real serious interest in learning about why this is happening so they can figure out what to do about it.
I always say the truth is like a pillar. It's something that doesn't move. You have all the fake news, you have all the propaganda, the censorship, but the truth ages very well. And they always historically fight so hard against it. And you're seeing that with your videos where you said something that was profound at the time. And it's so real that even 50, 60 years later, 30 years later, it's still true, and perhaps still one of the best examples to explain what's going on. It's incredible. On that note, I wanted to ask you, did Call of Duty pay you for the interview, or did they just kind of take the clips?
Oh yeah, I got a nice little check. I forgot what it was. I mean, you can't buy a car with it, but it was going to be nice. Everybody said, "Hey, that's a big company, and they're going to make millions and millions of dollars off of that. You ought to ask for a lot of money." And I was thinking to myself, "Yeah, maybe I should." And I thought, I think I'll just be very modest, because I wanted that thing out. To me, the biggest payoff is not the money. It's because millions of people are seeing it.
Right? I mean, right? After all this time, imagine how amazing that is. You find out, hey, all this work you put in, people are finally going to see it, man. After decades of sticking to your guns and all the work and time you took to put into this to try to help other people, sometimes we don't think it's coming, but these kind of stories right here give me hope, right? That over the course of times that it could very well happen. It's all going to happen when it's supposed to happen at the perfect time, right?
You couldn't pay me enough. I would have given it. If they would have said, no, we can't pay you anything, I would have still given it to them. Now that I got the contract signed, I'll tell them that. But yeah, that was the important thing to me.
That's incredible. When I saw it, because everything now is leftist, Marxist, communist, everything. It's in SpongeBob, it's in Nickelodeon. You can't find a single company that doesn't do that. So when I saw your Yuri interview in it, I was like, no way, I can't believe they used something that's going to lead people to learning about communism.
Yeah. They're going upstream for sure.
It's amazing.
In 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are
think about that real quick. And it's always great to see Yuri back on the channel. I mean, so many times I just want to rewatch all of his stuff again with everybody, but I know we've already been down there, and there's old videos out there, live videos of from on the channel that you can go back and watch all of this stuff. We did I think 2 or 3 Sundays on that one. It's in the Valley of the Shadows series. So if you look at that playlist, you can find the Yuri stuff.
Stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization.
I'm so glad, as guys, we don't sit like this anymore. Like I could never sit like that. It's very uncomfortable to sit like that. I don't see how dudes back then used to do that or why they used to do it. I'm glad we got our kick the knee out version of a man putting his leg up, not crossing his legs.
Liberalization is complete and
Call me crazy.
irreversible. To get rid society of
Call it
these
a crazy
people,
Wednesday.
you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and
Yes.
who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes, simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people, and the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. They will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him.
Think about that. Person who's demoralized cannot discern information, and the facts tell nothing to them. I mean, that's amazingly true, and we see it all the time, don't we?
Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically, America is
waiting around for bullets
with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality.
You see? Oh, see it. There you go. Gotta get the reality out. See what I'm saying? It's generational warfare, as in our energies and our efforts need to be focused in that area, right? It's going to be what it is now as far as the grown-ups go. But what we see now is a bigger, stronger, more concerted, more powerful, more resource-driven attack on the younger generation. That's why that's what we need to understand is they know we're messed up. They already got us. We've been through the system. We've been raised in it. We're already stuck in our roles and in our debt and everything else in this world. What other traps we fell down on along the way. The kids haven't yet, right? So if they could screw them up now early, right, they'll have an easier time controlling them and directing them and steering them into certain peril later on in life. It'll be easier for them to take the country. We say there's no way this is going to happen right now, right? We're probably right, but nobody's thinking down the road. We think, well, if it can't happen today, it can't happen tomorrow. Nobody sees the underlying current, the plan that was been going on since before you were born to slowly, like bullying a frog, change things, right? and it's an idea that's driving it, and people behind this idea that's driving it, and people's wanting to hang on to what they have driving it. And there's a bunch of different things driving it, but this is a tool, a weapon. Communism is a tool and a weapon of division and destabilization and of conquest of freedom, right? It's they wear the mask to pull you in. Then when the mask comes off, it's too late.
Back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. It's what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast.
Pray to God, pray to God. Yeah, pray to God.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Anomaly. Thank you, Mr. Anomaly, for doing great work and for having Griffin on and allowing us to review your content tonight, sir. You do good stuff. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's how the whole interview with Yuri came along and what it was all about and what the key points were and so on. But yeah, the whole idea that we've had this information for a long time now. Looking back on it, it makes more sense to us now than it did then, right? We have more resources, we have more information, we have more people in the know, right? Talking about it. Come a long ways. And it's probably how this thing goes, right? It happens, you don't see it coming, and then when you think you see it coming, people don't take it seriously, or they don't take the people saying you should take it seriously, right? And then you end up in this situation a couple of generations later, where you're literally worried about the very worst thing happening, right? And I think that they've learned how to adapt this model to rotate between the demoralization, the destabilization, and the crisis. And then the normalization isn't the tanks rolling down the street anymore. It's new legislation. It's a slow drift towards the total government. They've slowed it down a lot, I think, because of the nature of this country and how powerful our Constitution and our Bill of Rights are. I think that's what they had to do. Like they couldn't have destabilized us in 2 to 5 years, brought us a crisis, and then rolled in the tanks, right? That wasn't going to happen in America. So they've had to play a little jazz here with this program. Maybe back in the days before the collapse of the Soviet Union, they thought this was possible. I can still see a scenario where a stronger country during our weakest points could take advantage of this situation, like China, maybe a conglomerate of China and other countries that formed together. Could take advantage of the situation. A pincer move would be like coming from the East Coast and the West Coast during a time of crisis. Say the power's out, say our supply chain's down, say people are rioting. Perfect time to take over the country. Perfect time. And all the little kids that are out there screaming for communism and all their stupidness will help them get right in the door. That's the scary part. That's why I'm saying that, our focus needs to be on the younger generations and generational warfare, because they're the ones who will let them in the door, honestly, if we don't educate our kids and educate the newer generations on these dangers and how these things work, right? No need to put it off to tomorrow. If they're already trying to confuse them about their identity in kindergarten, we should at least tell them the truth about the world and ideologies at a younger age. I mean, they can handle it. But yeah, so that's our journey into Marxism and authoritarianism. And I would love to get thank you, Rabbit. Thank you so much for finding that information for me. Teach your kids to think for themselves. Absolutely. So true. That's one of the reasons I decided not to have children. That's them winning right there. That's the other side of winning, when they take people that are, have the potential to be part of the solution and keep them from reproducing. So it was not too late. Get going. Because, I got one, man. I wish I had more, but you know, the one I have is awesome, and I'm gonna do the best I can with what I got. But I'm sure not gonna let them take my genes out of the gene pool because they're painting some dire picture of the world. I don't believe. I still, maybe it's the optimist inside me, but I still believe that there's a chance for us to win. And you know, and if anything, the way balance would work out is like at the very last minute, they've gotten everything they wanted. They have this whole society built up, and then they fall apart, or something takes away their power and enablement, and we get it all. And we actually have a good society without them, right? We go back to a liberty society of the future, right? Um, so, you know, I think that is very possible, right? The only thing that can stop us is ourselves, the division. That's why I harp on the root cause issues like division and control of language. We have to be able to communicate, and we have to be able to stick together. We have to realize who's on the good guy team and who isn't, and we have to realize that people will exploit the loopholes in our human brain OS. It always will. They'll always be trying it. There's people trying to do it to you right now in your own life. You know, no doubt. It's just one of those things that stronger minds will prevail. They will triumph. Yeah, so that's what we're doing. Tomorrow night, Repairing History, we're going to take a deep dive into Thomas Sowell. And we will see this topic come back up over on that show, but it'll be a deep dive into that Manning guy. So I have a big, long collection of work on him, and we'll look into what he was saying about it, and we'll really dig into the communist infiltration of the Black community and how that affected our relationship and what we got to do to fix that, right? On Saturday night, one more Saturday night, we're going to have a hippie party like you wouldn't believe, right? We're going to have it's all about the hippies, hippie culture, new age culture. I'm probably going to maybe invite a guest on or so to talk with, to enjoy this with us. And we're going to look at the history of the rainbow gathering people, and we'll have a lot of information, side information you're not going to find probably on the internet at all. I'll be able to fill in there, as I've been part of these, not the rainbow part. I was never a crunchy hippie, man. Don't get me wrong. I was just a musician who liked the music, and I happen to have long hair from my metal beach background, and it just worked out just fine. But I do enjoy the music, and I do enjoy a lot of the people, aside from the weirdness of the crowd in that scene. They're not all bad, but they're really misled people, and they think they know a lot more than they do. A lot of it's just like, you know, they don't realize how much what they participate in affects the way they think. And anyways, we're going to learn the history of that, and it'll touch on some of the other things that we've learned on this channel, but it'll be a good time for the most part. We'll have some other stuff at the end, some bonus content, some fun content. I try to keep it light on Saturdays. That's why the hippies are a good one to put on Saturdays, because it's a light topic, and we'll have some good music, some good jams on there too. The hippies got good music, man. You can't deny that. But you know, the folk stuff I can probably care less about. But anyways, that's what we're going to be doing this week. And as I told you, you'll be seeing a new channel pop up for me that will be specifically for the content, copyright claimed content that I make with the AI, and that the system at YouTube's too stupid to figure it out. And we're going to get this channel remonetized hopefully by this weekend. I will keep you posted, and I'll see you then. But until next time, y'all keep winning. Thank you, Flair. Thank you, Daisy Girl. Thank you, Sweetie. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you. Let's see what I got in here. Moose. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, T-Rex. Thank you, Clumsy. Thank you. I just got up in here. Lady Autumn. Thank you. See me later. Thank you. Y'all have a great night.